The gray jungle stretched before Kira like a nightmare made real. She stood at the edge of the forbidden zone, her heart beating fast in her chest. The trees here were not green like the ones near her village. They were the color of ash, their leaves silver and white, their bark dark as coal. No one from the Navi clans had entered this place in 300 years. The elders said death waited inside. They said the spirits of the jungle had cursed this land long ago. But Kira was young. She was curious. And she had seen something in the mist yesterday, something that moved and glowed with strange light. She had to know what it was. She was only 16 summers old, small for her age, with blue skin marked by patterns that swirled like flowing water. Her golden eyes were large and bright, always looking, always searching. The other young Navi called her strange because she asked too many questions. Why did the sky glow at night? Why did certain plants heal wounds? Why were some places forbidden? Her mother said curiosity would bring her trouble one day. Today might be that day. Kira took a deep breath and stepped forward. The ash-colored leaves crunched under her feet. The air smelled different here, sharp and metallic like blood and fire mixed together. She moved slowly, her bow ready in her hands, her ears turning to catch every sound. The jungle was quiet, too quiet. No birds sang. No creatures moved in the branches above. It felt like walking through a place that had died long ago but forgot to fall down. She walked for what felt like hours. The trees grew closer together, their twisted branches blocking out the sky. Gray moss hung from everything like the hair of old spirits. Then she saw it, a wall. It rose from the ground like the bones of some giant beast. It was made of material she had never seen before, smooth and hard and covered in strange patterns. The patterns looked like writing, but not like any writing her people used. There were symbols and shapes that hurt her eyes to look at. Kira touched the wall. It was cold, colder than stone should be. And then something happened that made her jump back with a cry. The wall lit up. Blue light spread from where her hand had touched, racing along the patterns like water flowing through channels. The symbols began to glow, one after another, until the whole wall was alive with soft blue fire. And then a sound came, a voice, speaking words she could not understand. She should have run. Every part of her body screamed at her to run. But she stayed, because in that moment, she saw something beyond the wall, through a gap where stone had crumbled away. There was a whole city inside. Buildings rose toward the sky, tall and strange, made of the same smooth material as the wall. They were damaged, broken, covered in ash and growth, but they were still standing. And in the center of them all was something that made her breath stop in her throat. A ship. She had heard stories about ships that sailed through the stars. The elders spoke of them in whispers, tales passed down from ancestors who lived before the great dying. They said creatures had come from the sky long ago, creatures that walked on two legs like the Navi, but were different, smaller, with strange pale skin. The story said these creatures had brought death and fire. The story said Awa herself had risen up to push them back, to heal the land they had wounded. But looking at this ship, Kira did not feel fear. She felt sadness, because she could see now that the ship had not come here to make war. It had crashed. It had fallen from the sky like a wounded bird, and it had never risen again. She climbed through the gap in the wall, her curiosity burning brighter than her fear. The city streets were empty and silent. Ash covered everything in a thick gray blanket. She walked past buildings with broken windows, past strange machines that sat dead and cold, past what looked like carts that had no animals to pull them. And then she found the bodies. They were everywhere. Inside buildings, on the streets, near the ship. Skeletons, hundreds of them, still wearing the remains of strange coverings. They were small, smaller than Navi, with round skulls and short limbs. Some were lying together in groups, holding each other. Some were alone. Kira knelt beside one of them. It was lying near a door, its bone hand reaching towards something inside. She looked and saw what it had been reaching for. A small box made of metal that still gleamed despite the years. She picked it up carefully. It was light, covered in buttons and screens that had gone dark. But when she turned it over, something fell out. A flat square, thin as a leaf, covered in images. Pictures. They were pictures of the creatures, the humans. She could see them clearly now. They had pale skin, yes, but their eyes were kind. Their faces showed smiles. In one picture, a human was holding a baby, looking at it with such love that Kira felt tears form in her eyes. In another, humans were standing together, their arms around each other, laughing at something she would never know. These were not monsters. These were people. People with families and friends and children. People who had loved and laughed and lived. She looked at the skeleton again, at its reaching hand, and she understood. This human had been trying to save the pictures when it died. In its final moments, it had wanted to hold on to the memories of the people it loved. Kira sat down on the ground and cried. She cried for creatures she had never known, for a people her ancestors had fought and feared. She cried because she understood now that the stories were wrong. The humans had not come to destroy. They had come to explore, to learn, to find new worlds. And something had killed them, something terrible, something that had ended their entire city in a single moment. When her tears dried, she stood up and put the pictures back in the box. Then she looked at the ship again, and she made a decision. She would find out what really happened here. She would learn the truth about the humans and the great dying. And she would share that truth with her people, even if it changed everything they believed. She walked toward the ship, her fear forgotten, her heart full of purpose. The door was hanging open, twisted by the crash, but still passable. She squeezed through and found herself in a corridor lit by faint emergency lights that still somehow worked after all these years. The humans had built things that lasted, she thought. Things that kept working even after their makers were gone. What else had they built? What else had they known? She moved deeper into the ship, past rooms filled with strange equipment, past walls covered in screens and buttons. And then she found what she was looking for. A library. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books, but with small metal squares like the one she had found outside. Thousands of them. And in the center of the room was a machine, still glowing with soft blue light. Still waiting after 300 years for someone to come and ask it questions. Kira reached out and touched it. The machine hummed to life. Screens lit up all around her, showing images and words in a language she could not read. But then something changed. The machine made sounds, speaking in the strange human tongue, and then it stopped and made different sounds. It was learning. It was trying to communicate with her. Within an hour, it had found her language in its memories. Within 2 hours, it was speaking to her in words she could understand. And within 3 hours, Kira learned the truth that would change her world forever. The humans had not been invaders. They had been refugees. The machine, which called itself Atlas, told her a story that spanned the stars. The humans had come from a world far away. A world they had accidentally destroyed through their own callousness. They had used up everything, poisoned their air and water, made their home impossible to live in. So they had built ships and fled, searching for new places to survive. They had found Pandora. They had found the Na'vi. And for a while, there had been conflict. The humans needed resources to live. The Na'vi protected their home. Both sides had done terrible things. But then something had changed. Some humans had learned. They had seen the beauty of Pandora, had understood the connection between all living things, had fallen in love with the world and its people. These humans had fought against their own kind to protect the Na'vi. They had sacrificed everything for a planet that was not theirs. And in the end, they had won. The bad humans had left or died. The good humans had stayed, had lived among the Na'vi, had shared their knowledge and learned from them in return. The two species had become one family. But then the sickness came. ATLAs showed her records of the plague that had swept through both species. It came from space, carried on a ship that arrived too late to help and too soon to be stopped. The humans had no defense against it. The Na'vi did, but just barely. Within a year, every human on Pandora was dead. The Na'vi survived, but they lost so many. And in their grief and fear, they blamed the humans for bringing the death. They burned the human cities. They forbade anyone from entering the places where humans had lived. They told their children that the humans had been evil, that Awa had destroyed them for their sins. The truth was forgotten, buried under ash and lies. Until now. Kira stood in the library of the dead ship, surrounded by the knowledge of a fallen people, and she wept again. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of wonder. The humans had known so much. They had understood the stars and the tiny things that make up all matter. They had built machines that could heal wounds and grow food and talk across distances. They had made terrible mistakes, yes, but they had also tried to fix them. They had fought against their own worst nature. They had tried to be better. And they had left all of their knowledge behind, waiting in this library for someone to find it. Kira spent 3 days in the ship. She ate the dried food she had brought with her. She slept on the floor of the library, and she learned. She learned about medicine and farming and building. She learned about history and science and art. She learned about humanity, all of humanity, the good and the bad and the beautiful and the ugly. When she finally left the ash jungle, she carried a bag full of the metal squares and a head full of ideas. The elders were furious. They said she had brought curses upon herself. They said she would die from the sickness of the Forbidden Zone. They said she must be cleansed and punished. But Kira was not afraid anymore. She stood before the Council of Elders and told them what she had learned. She showed them the pictures of the humans with their children. She showed them the records of the plague and the truth about the great dying. She showed them the knowledge that had been waiting for 300 years to be found. Some of them listened. Some of them did not. The arguments lasted for weeks, then months. Many said she was lying. Many said the machines had corrupted her mind. Many said the old ways were the only ways. But some of the young ones believed her. They followed her back to the ash jungle. They learned to use the machines and read the metal squares. They discovered things that changed how they saw the world. Within a year, the first new medicines were being made. Sicknesses that had killed Na'vi children for generations were suddenly curable. Within 2 years, the first new tools were being built. Tools that could dig wells and filter water and grow more food than anyone had thought possible. The elders could not argue with results. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to accept the truth. Kira did not stop there. She spent her whole life studying the human knowledge and teaching it to her people. She learned that humanity had explored many worlds, that they had met other species in the stars, that the universe was vast beyond imagining. She learned that humans were not special in their mistakes or their triumphs. Every species that reached for the stars had to face the choice between destruction and growth, between fear and hope. The humans had failed in the end, at least on Pandora. But they had left behind a gift, a treasure of knowledge that could help the Na'vi avoid the same mistakes. When Kira was old, with gray in her hair and wrinkles on her face, she stood at the edge of the ash jungle one last time. It was no longer forbidden. A school stood where the wall had been, where young Na'vi learned about the stars and the humans who had reached them. The city beyond had been cleaned and restored, turned into a museum and a library and a monument to the people who had died there. A statue stood in the center of the city now. It showed a human and a Na'vi standing side by side, their hands joined, looking up at the sky together. At the base of the statue were words in both languages. They came from the stars. They made mistakes. They learned. They tried to do better. They became our family. We remember them. Kira smiled at the statue. Then she looked up at the stars, at the countless lights that burned in the endless dark. "We will find you," she said quietly. "Wherever you are, whoever survived, we will find you and tell you that your children on Pandora never forgot. We will find you and show you what we built together." She did not know if anyone was listening. She did not know if any humans still lived somewhere in the vast universe. But she believed. She had faith. And 40 years later, long after Kira had returned to Awa, a ship appeared in the sky above Pandora. It was small and battered, carrying refugees who had fled from world to world for generations. They were the last of humanity, the final survivors of a species that had once filled the stars. They expected to find enemies on Pandora. They expected to find hate and fear and the ghosts of old wars. Instead, they found the people waiting for them with open arms. They found Na'vi who knew their history, who had preserved their knowledge, who had honored their dead. They found a world that was ready to welcome them home. The young human captain stood on the landing platform, tears streaming down her face as a Na'vi elder approached her. The elder was old, her skin pale blue, her eyes golden and wise. She was the great-granddaughter of a young explorer who had once dared to enter a forbidden jungle. "Welcome home," the elder said. "We have been waiting for you." And humanity, broken and scattered and nearly gone, took its first steps toward being reborn. Not as conquerors this time, not as destroyers, but as partners, as family, as part of something greater than themselves. In the museum in the old city, the pictures Kira had found 300 years ago still sat in their metal box. The human captain held them with shaking hands, looking at the faces of ancestors she had never known. "They kept them," she whispered. "They kept everything." The Na'vi elder smiled. "Your people taught us many things," she said. "But the most important thing they taught us was this. Every species can change. Every people can learn. Every darkness can be followed by light. We are not defined by our worst moments. We are defined by what we do next." The captain looked at her, at the world around her, at the impossible miracle of finding family among strangers. "Then let us show you what we do next," she said. Together. And high above them, the stars burned on, endless and beautiful, waiting for both species to reach them once again.